Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So let's talk more with Marianne and with Ian, and it is The Independent to which we go first. The Newsnight journalist, tell us more about this story.
This, on the face of it, is quite an incredible story because it's the sort of story you would expect to read about in a dictatorship, and we are not yet a dictatorship. Police have used powers under the Terrorism Act to go into the Newsnight offices at the BBC and to seize the laptop of a journalist. Now, this journalist has been investigating ISIS. He's got good contacts with people who've gone, jihadis who've gone from this country to Syria, and I think some of his reports have been absolutely fascinating watching. Now, the police have decided that these contacts are obviously of interest to them, and they've gone in and seized his laptop. Now, no journalist is above the law, but I think it sets a very dangerous precedent when you have police going to seize journalists' laptops unless they've got real suspicion that the journalist has done something very wrong. And that doesn't even seem to be the sort of insinuation in this story.
Well, no, and it's this 2000 Terrorism Act that was passed in the year 2000 says that police are entitled to breach the confidentiality between journalist and an anonymous source. Now, there's a bit of an argument about whether the particular jihadi British-born ISIS member was officially an anonymous source because he appeared in Secunda Kamani's reports on Newsnight. But the bottom line is, if this means that people won't speak to journalists because journalists can't assure anonymity, then we all suffer, police and public alike, because journalists are there to uncover truths that are important to us all.
And yet, you look at the next story we're going to look at, I think is on the front page of the Telegraph, where the director of MI6, Andrew Parks, has issued some fairly stark warnings about the likelihood of a terror attack. Now, this is not the first time he's done this, but he said that they've scuppered 6 or 7 major attacks over the last 12 months. And in a sense, he's saying, look, it's only a matter of time before someone gets through the net. We can't actually stop every single one. So he would argue, I suppose, and I don't know whether it's MI5 that have been involved in this laptop thing or not, he would argue that we've got to get as much information as we can to try and stop these things.
And Mr Parker also publicly admitting, the paper tells us, for the first time that MI5 had to carry out computer hacking attacks against terror networks to crack their communications. Just as we start to see, once again, the Snoopers Charter, as Nick Clegg named it, beginning to go through the process of becoming law.
It's funny because I think often we think about the war against terror as a boots on ground or drones in the air, but actually so much of this is in the internet or in the kind of the dark web, which is certainly beyond my comprehension. And so we're giving away powers that we, as a kind of society, don't even know that we have, and we're sort of authorising entitlements to both security services and But
what is the balance between...
We can't know what they're getting up to.
The government
that's
says,
the thing.
and they've got right on their side on this, they say that, well, the legislation hasn't kept up with the terrorists because the last terrorism act was 2000, or I think, that relates to the so-called Snoopers Charter, to sort of the powers of the police or the intelligence services to go into
monitor,
people's emails. And yet, I mean, I have real civil liberties doubts about whether they should be able to do what the security services clearly want to be able to do. And that's where the politicians find themselves in the middle, having to make a judgment call on what is acceptable and what isn't.
And again, once again, also 4/5, he said, of the 4,000-strong agency's resources directed at stopping terrorist attacks, an increasing proportion of those linked to Syria and Islamic State in Iraq. So
the thing that
it is an increasing problem.
Yeah, the quote that I find most chilling is that he says that there's greater ambition for mass casualty attacks, that this is a considered strategic intention to kill people on British soil and maim and
that was the difference with Irish terrorism, who didn't want to target civilians necessarily, did they? Even though they obviously did.
Up to a point.
Yes, up to a point, indeed. We'll move on to this story, which is really a success, you could say, for Philip Hammond, who declared
I
today on
think
his
it is
visit.
to an
This
extent.
is a weird story. This confuses me, this one.
Why does it
No,
confuse
go on,
you?
go on.
Well, no, tell me why it confuses you, and I'll see if I can
No, go
solve
ahead.
it.
No,
well,
go on,
I just
summarise.
think that, I mean, Saudi Arabia, there was an interesting article by the Saudi ambassador in the Telegraph the other day where he complained about British attitudes to Saudi Arabia, and I thought, you've got to be kidding. Because Saudi Arabia has a terrible human rights record. Its judicial system is appalling, all the sort of amputations, cutting off people's hands and all the rest of it. And I think that as a civilised country, we should be free to criticise countries that do things like that. However, we live in the real world. We have to accept that we have to deal with countries that we might not approve of. And we do a lot of trade with Saudi Arabia. So politicians have always got quite a difficult tightrope to walk. And Philip Hammond, visiting Saudi Arabia today, might have been expecting a bit of a bad reception because they've just cancelled this contract with the Saudi prison service to sort of help them develop their prisons. So I think to have achieved this is something sort of quite laudable.
Except he was sentenced to 12 months, and it's been well over that now, and he's only still in there.
15
months, and he's only still in there because of administrative bungling, so the guy should get freedom.
He hasn't had the lashes, and he will be released within a week.
Yeah.
And yeah, he deserved to be punished because he
confusion
their
is
laws.
That's the thing that confuses me. That
So why should we have sympathy, is what you're saying?
Off the back of a public outcry that he's a granddad and he's got little grandchildren kind of saying, oh, granddad's an old man.
Wife's not well.
The problem is, well, not at the minute. And you know, if he's not fit to meet his punishment, then different rules should apply. But the thing is,
he's had his
if you
punishment.
go to a country and you break their rules, then you have to
he accepts that.
kind of...
Yeah, he accepts that. In fact, his son, talking to us earlier, said first thing we'll do is tell him off, you know.
Yeah.
But he has lived there for 25 years, hasn't he? So
He has, but you break the rules and you suffer the consequences. We can't pick and choose the bits
but he's not. They're not
This
picking
isn't
and
a
choosing.
human rights issue.
No,
right,
it
for
really
me.
is, because he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. He served 15 months. Now, if that was in this country, there would be an outcry about that, because prisoners in this country get let out after half their sentence.
But that's not why it's captured the public imagination. The public imagination has been captured by the 350 lashes.
And quite right too.
yeah,
I
because we
think-
don't have corporal punishment in this country,
No,
therefore
we
it's abhorrent
don't.
to us.
But if you live in a country and you break their laws, then you, in the same way that the
But if you don't like the laws or the enactment of that punishment.
executed in Indonesia, you smuggle drugs.
Yes, but if you're a civilised country,
it's
you argue
separate.
against those sorts of
I
punishments,
get that.
don't
Okay,
you?
so you argue against the use of corporal or capital punishment, but when a particular case of law breaking and law, you know, kind of judicial justice has been served,
Judicial process, yeah.
process has been followed, that you can't criticise.
But
Criticise
no one
capital
was
and corporal
arguing.
punishment
No one was
separately.
arguing that he shouldn't have served the sentence to which he was punished for. But they were arguing, and that's where I would expect, if I was in that situation, I would expect the British government to make representations that I shouldn't get lashes, because I mean that's what you expect your government to do.
Yep, we're running over again.
Okay.
Let's go to an inside story of the Daily Mail. This is identifying the areas where children are most likely to be overweight by the age of 11. Where are some of those places?
Well, the headline is that most children are now overweight by the time they leave primary school in...
Shall I zoom it in a bit more? It's quite little, isn't it? Hold on.
Top of the league table was
Redcar,
Dover,
North Yorkshire, Dover.
Ilkeston in Derbyshire, Netherhall and Maryport, Cumbria, and Ellesmere Port.
The problem is...
Well, they're saying that more than 50% of the children that leave then are
and
overweight.
that's terrifying, because the implications, well, not just for individuals and families, the implications for the cost of looking after those people, those children, for the rest of their lives is going to cripple us. We cannot afford to have that many overweight people.
Why do you think
and
this is
all the
happening
allied
now, as
ailments.
opposed to when we really had abject poverty in this country? Because if it is just down to poverty and people's diets, why wasn't that the case in the 1930s, for example?
Because lifestyle has changed, because we're much more sedentary, and because cheap food is even more saturated with fat and sugar and flavour than it ever
and at least
was.
then people would get fresh food, even if it wasn't very plentiful.
Well, that's it,
They
yeah.
would have
So
fresh
poor
food.
food then was porridge and potatoes,
Yeah.
and poor food now is cheese strings and cans of Coke. And that's why you have more than half of the children are overweight. It just... I feel so distressed.
So we've had this,
that.
the Public Health England report into sugar, revealing that if Britons reduced their sugar intake to healthy levels, the NHS would save £14 billion over the next 25 years.
And again, I mean, who can disagree with that? The other, I mean, you made a really good point there about sort of processed foods, because I think a lot of the ills in our own health at the moment is because we eat so many processed foods. If we knew what was in them, we just wouldn't touch them.
Well, that's it.
And yet no one seems to come up with a solution. We've identified the problem.
Well, I think Public Health England's report did come up with quite a few solutions that have been dismissed out of hand. One of them is the sugar tax. One of them is actually addressing the Food and Drink Association and their members, their partisan members, and saying what you do is not good for society.
And I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that.
Is responsible for looking after us.
Come on in.
OK. No, actually, we're responsible for looking after ourselves. We each have individual responsibility to do that. But if you put 7 pence on a can of Coke, that's not going to deter anyone from buying it. What they should be doing is saying to the drinks manufacturers, you have a year, instead of having 10 grams per 100 millilitres or whatever it is in your can of Fanta, you've got to reduce that to 7 or 8. And if you don't, we will force you to by legislation. That would have far more effect than putting 7 pence on a can of Coke.
Why don't we do both?
Well, because you don't need to do both.
Because we put a duty on alcohol, we put a duty on cigarettes. And
there's already lots of duty. I mean, there's 20% VAT on soft drinks.
But that's the same as VAT on a loaf of bread.
Well, there isn't VAT on a loaf of bread.
Oh, no, there's not, is there? There's VAT on...
Well, there is...
But you can put duty on
of course you
food
can,
that is bad for you, that has no nutritional content
that's where I come
and
back
has
to,
a massive impact on our taxes.
But that's where I come back to individual responsibility. You have to put it... this is partly by public education or sort of health education, but it's got to be individuals that make these decisions. You can't change people's behaviour just through taxation. And the trouble with people on the left is that they see something and they automatically want to tax it. And that's what's happening with the sugar tax.
At the minute, the people who are profiting from these children's ill health aren't you and I. The people profiting aren't the fat kids who are having cancer.
We've got 30 seconds left.